All right, friends, we made it to the end of another week of Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball. If you're wondering why there's a pause, well, you know why there's a pause. I'm really trying not to say the wrong name, and I've already screwed this up a few times, but not today. Brief pause, get it right. That thing works. Also, if you're watching after the fact, and you're wondering why the poster board behind me is moving slightly, it's because my normal standing fan broke, and I brought in this gigantic one that's physically blowing the board around. So it looks like I'm doing this show on a boat. But I don't have time for that nonsense. I'm Dan Besbris. Welcome to the show. We have eliminated the Twitter live stream, and I want everybody to push somewhere else, whether it's YouTube, iTunes, Spotify. Those are now your only spots to find it. And today, we're talking to the punt master himself, the great Adam G. Stock, who, as I bring him on here, is now the proud father of not one, but two youths. Congratulations, officially. I know I said it off air, but congrats on air. Two is crazy, man. Welcome to the lunacy.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. It's nice too. It gives me a good excuse if I say anything dumb today, so it works out well.
Oh, I've been using that excuse for the last 4 years since we had our second child.
It's good. It's a very legit one. I am definitely dumber than I was a couple of years ago when my first kid came.
Right? Parents just get dumber every year. I get dumber, and now I'm realizing I really should have given my parents more of a break because they got dumber every year. And no, love you, Mom. My dad passed away not that recently, but he got dumber too. Not for nothing. So, at Adam G. Stock, Elite Fantasy Basketball. We'll be doing some promo at the end of this bad boy, so fear not. You can find him on social media at Adam G. Stock, as I just mentioned. I want to talk. We had a few things that I thought we could get into, but I can't not do punting because you're the punt master. Like, I don't know. Do other people call you that on podcasts, or is it still just me?
No, just you. That's your special name.
Damn it. Well, I'm going to work on that. I'm going to get it to spread. I already put that in a tweet that I sent out about this show, and I'm going to make it happen. Oh, no, I didn't. I forgot to put it in there. Well, I'll do it in the next one. So what you do that I think is really awesome on the punting side is you don't do it the usual way. You do it finding new methods that other folks haven't really explored yet. Like the common one, and I'll stop monologuing in a minute here, has always been, one of the percentages, free throw, field goal, wherever it is, and or turnovers is also very common. But before the season, this year, last year, whatever, we always talk about these other routes you found, whether it's threes or points or rebounds or how did that, this is a broad topic, I get it, but how did that kind of zigging when they zag turn out this season in review?
I think it worked out really well. I was really happy with my guys this year. I'm not just hyping myself up. Like some years they're definitely better than others, but this year I was really trying to push guys towards more big man heavy team just because of how the rankings were set up. And I think that worked out really well. Like I thought punt free throw percentage was like ridiculous this year, at least until the injuries kind of hit late year. Like you can't really use that to judge a punting strategy. But when you look at like enough of those mid-round bigs hit, Giannis had a good year, Luka had a good year. If you knew which guards to target in rounds 2 and 3, like you probably did pretty well. Like Mitchell was godly when he was healthy. Fred was great, which is a guy people usually don't think about, but he was a pretty big target for punt free throw. So I tried to push guys towards that. I think it was the right call. The other ones still worked pretty well for the most part. Like there's nothing wrong with punt field goal percentage, especially in 8 cat. But a big part of what I do is trying to identify the builds that have a bit of an advantage this year because of the rankings. Like at the end of the day, the effectiveness of any punting strategy is going to come down to rankings and price. Like you can only do so much, and you can't just take the same approach every year. You can't just assume, well, I've done well with punt field goal percentages in the past, that's going to work this year, or I've done well with punt points, which I think is getting pretty tricky to pull off these days. Like that used to be my go-to, and now I'm a little hesitant on it.
you know, I love me some punt points.
Yeah, me too. That's like my go-to in the past. Now these days, I'm just like, kind of.
Yeah. So what is it about? I have so many follow-up questions because I love this conversation. It can go in so many directions. I'll just start on the punt points comment because it's the last one we were just talking about. What has made it harder over the last year and change?
I wouldn't say just over the last year. I think as the NBA has evolved, it's the threes. The bar for getting a decent amount of threes is so high. Like back in the day, you used to be able to grab someone like Darrell Wright or Trevor Ariza. You know, they give you threes. I know the Darrell Wright. That was a big year, man. For the guys who weren't playing fantasy back then, Darrell Wright came out of nowhere. Was like a third round guy, and then never did anything again. But like he was so good for 1 year, and then Ariza was a stud for like a decade. But back in the day, you could get those like one guy who hits like 2.5 threes, and maybe you get 2 or 3 more of those guys, and you're good in threes. But these days, almost your entire team has to have it. So when you're giving up points, you're giving up a lot of the high volume 3-point shooters. It becomes much harder, and it also becomes much harder to target some of those like mid round bigs, like Gafford killed it in punt points, but he put you in such a hole in threes, like all those mid-round bigs were a little tricky. So while I still love punt points, if you're punting threes or maybe even like free throw percentage alongside, I think these days punt points on its own is a lot trickier to pull off. Like, yeah, you still get the advantage of guys finishing high in the rankings at deflated prices. But in terms of team building, it's pretty complicated these days, even more so. It's always been probably the toughest strategy to do, definitely only for guys who know and gals who know what they're doing. But these days, it's even tougher.
So in terms of, you were talking about how the board looks and how that can dictate what direction you move on punting. How do you sort of connect A to B on that one? What are you looking for in a board?
Yeah. So I'm looking for like who is in the middle rounds can really just be an early round guy in their build. So this year it was like there was some very obvious bigs in that range. And then you looked at the guards and you're like, I actually don't think there's too many guards here who could really outperform. So that's kind of what I look at first. Like, is the mid round picks that are bigs, are they closer to the early round bigs than the early round guards are to the mid round guards? And then like kind of go from there. And this year it was very obvious that it was.
So that's based on like if you eliminated the punt category from that mid-round big.
Yeah. Like those guys are still going to be like better. The early round guys are still going to be better, but yeah.
What's an interesting example you think of where a mid-round big with punt one thing basically nuzzled up to, not all the way, but like you said, the early guy's going to be better, but got sort of somewhat close to an early round big?
Yeah, I mean, you look like Gafford was like a first rounder in a lot of builds. He was obvious, but even guys who had up and down years, like Pirtle was all over the place, but he was really good if you got him the right build, and he would have crushed it down there. He would have won leagues if he stayed healthy down the stretch. So those mid round bigs, not all of them worked out. Like Mark Williams got hurt, but he would have been a good guy if he stayed healthy. So all those like mid round bigs we kind of targeted, like they all, like at least on a per game basis, a lot of them ended up as top 30 guys, outperforming their draft position by 3-4 rounds. And I thought that was like really obvious and kind of just shifted, at least in 9-cat. 8-cat, it's always hard to go away from small ball teams, but at least in 9-cat, that kind of shifted my preference this year towards more big, heavy teams. Punt free throw percentage is the best example. Punt threes was also huge this year, but I would argue punt threes is always huge. That's probably my favorite build at this point. I usually try not to play favorites too much together, but every year in punt threes, I'm like, just do this. Like, I know you're going to try punt field goal percentage first. I know a lot of the real sharp guys love punt assists, and for good reason, but I'm like, just mock it, like put together strategy for punt threes and see if you like it. Cause I'm pretty sure you will. So yeah, I went big heavy this year. I think it worked out well with the guides. I think that's probably going to be the approach next year too. Just with the rankings, I don't think there's too many of those mid-round bigs who aren't going to be mid-round bigs again.
You actually answered my follow-up question in the middle of that, but just to explore it a little bit further, the mid-round bigs that jumped up towards the first rounders, the reason that they were able to wedge a little closer together, was that largely because of 3-pointers or lack thereof?
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, if you're looking at the Z-scores and you look at what a 0 is these days, 0.03s per game, like that is a huge negative versus what it used to be. Like it is so much further away from the category mean these days. So they're jumping up in value a lot more than they used to. Like in the past, they used to jump maybe like 2 rounds, and now they can jump like 3-4 rounds.
How do you? Well, okay, so I guess I'll ask a little bit of a leading question, but then maybe I get it wrong, so you can tell me if I'm way off base here. If you're now thinking, okay, I want to try a punt free throw or a punt threes build, and we can maybe cover both of them, because I feel like there are a lot of big men targets in the middle rounds. Does that mean that your strategy typically targets the poor free throw shooting or poor 3-point shooting guards and wings early, and you wait on the bigs until later?
I don't care what the guards shoot from three. Like you look at my punt free throw percentage team this year was that didn't lose for 2.5 months before it like fell apart because of injuries. Was Giannis, Don Mitch, and Van Vliet. Like Don Mitch and Van Vliet are great from the line.
Shooters.
Does not matter. I just care about the points. I just care about the threes, steals, and assists. So I do target the guards early, but I'm not targeting poor free throw percentage like guards. Like I don't really care that a guy like Morant shoots bad from the line or Ant did before this year. I think punting has evolved a little bit from that. I think back in the day, everyone's like, yo, Rondo, he's so good in punt free percentage, but he actually wasn't. And like, I kind of figured this out back in the day. I wish I had started my site at that point, because I was like, no, Rondo was actually not that good in punt free throw percentage, because at least do a bunch of additional punts. You had to take him like the 3rd round. He's killing your points, killing your threes, killing your turnovers. Yeah, you get assists and steals, but at the end of the day, those are only 2 categories. And yeah, he goes up in the rankings because he shoots 50 from the line. But like the rankings aren't everything. You got to think about team build. You got to think about avoiding punting too many categories. So yeah, I mean, I don't care if a guard shoots 100% from the line and punt free throw percentage. If he's a good fit, like if he gives me the points, assists, and all the guard stats you need, like Steph was the best punt free throw percentage guy in my opinion for a while, just because of everything else he brought. Now he's fallen off a little bit, and some of the other guard options are a little better. But like I would still love Steph and punt free throw percentage.
The one thing you said that I'm really holding on to right now, and a point that I kind of want to drive home, because what I always tried to do on my old show feed and what I'd like to try to continue to do on this one, again, talking to Adam Stock, the punt master. I'm going to get it to stick, damn it. Adam G. Stock on Twitter, Elite Fantasy Basketball, is the way you talked about figuring out what punt makes sense based on the way the board looks. I love this. And you can't, so with the preface, of course, that all of this requires an intense amount of work and research and planning and all of that.
Yeah.
But that,
or just a quick subscription to Elite Fantasy Basketball. That's it too.
Yeah. And believe me, I'm going to be giving you the table here in a minute. Well, screw it. Let's do it now. What do you got going on over there?
In the summer, not too much, but I am starting the prep already for the for next season. I know the punting, like these guides are like 15,000 word like guides, like giving you recommendations for every round, giving you sample teams. Like they're very in depth. I don't want to brag, but I do think they're the best punting guides out there. But I mean that's not all the site is about. Definitely like we got stuff for the Roto guys. We got projections that I update 5-6 days a week. Matchup tool this year is big news. We're finally getting a draft tracker that hooks up to Yahoo.
Nice.
It's a little tricky, so we haven't got there yet. Yeah, honestly, it's been in the works for like 4 years, but it was very BBM kind of made it look easy back in the day, but it's pretty tough. Just got to get some of the calculations for it going, but the meat and potatoes of it works. They'll be out in beta form this year, so pretty excited about that. Definitely not going to be like the main focus of the site. It's never going to be like a tool site, but I think you can get some killer guides, some good tools, and just a way of thinking that you don't find in too many other spots.
And what's the best way to find that site?
EliteFantasyBasketball.com, or just hop on my Twitter at Adam G. Stock.
Yeah, there we go. I love it. Okay, so this simplification, which is obviously a gross oversimplification, yes, but I think it's something that people listening can grab onto if they're like, hey, I want to try to figure this out a little bit. Like I want to better myself. And so I can, like, it's a stupid way for me to try to run a show. My goal is always to teach people to do this well enough that they don't need me anymore, which I get it. It's dumb because that means I would ultimately lose.
Oh no, I think the same way. Sometimes I'm like, I feel like guys graduate from a set. They're like, okay,
Right.
you have it now, and they can do it on their own, but which is good.
Yes, this is what we want. We hope that they will continue to come back as almost like a loyalty thing more than anything else. But that's the reason that I want to dive in on this. I'm never going to be the show that goes 99.999% of the information. I'm going to be the one that tries to make it so that the person who has X number of hours in a week can compete with the folks who have X plus 20, number of hours in a week. And so that's the thing you said that really, really hit me hard, was like looking at the board based on punt, or reverse it, I guess. You can see possible punt strategies based on looking at guys you expect to jump from middle to upper crust with one particular punt. So when you, like, let's say Yahoo, they dropped their pre-ranks in, I think last year they did it in late July, which was amazing for them to have it so early. Not because late July sucks most of the time doing these fantasy shows. What are we talking about now? You look at that board, and let's say hypothetically you don't see a bunch of miscellaneous big men from like 50 to 70. Let's say you've got no idea what the board is going to look like. You're able to do your projections, see what guys can make that leap, and that then gives you avenues towards your potential punts, correct?
Yeah, like before I do anything, I do my projections. Usually in late July, so they're not going to be perfect or anything. It's really just a first draft. But from there, it's like, okay, I'm going to keep an eye on this guy, or I expect this guy to be in this range, and if he's not, okay, now we're in business. Like I will say the rankings have gone a lot tighter over the last 4 or 5 years, which is kind of annoying. But yeah, everything really flows from the projections, and then. But projections aren't everything. Like I would argue that they're honestly not that important. Like rankings aren't that important, but like I'm all about team build. So like I use them to start thinking about team build versus thinking about necessarily like great value.
If someone didn't have the requisite time to do projections, would you suggest looking at what a player did the previous season and making slight tweaks to that, just to kind of, again, simplify the process?
Yeah, I mean, if as long as the role doesn't change, or their team doesn't change, like you look at someone like Rudy Gobert, wasn't very good in Minnesota last year, but then he was amazing this year. So maybe like pick something in between a little bit. It doesn't need to be perfect.
Fuzzy method.
When you're putting together like team building stuff, it's more about like the type of player than getting the exact numbers right. Like the exact numbers don't matter that much, because in head to head, there's so much week to week variance. Like if a guy averages 25, but if you get just 32, like for the week, that's completely different. And you don't know when that's going to come. Like it's important for Roto, of course, but for head to head, it's more about the type of players and making sure that you have enough of each types so that your team build makes sense.
Oh man, I think that personally, I think that this idea that you have here, and I know this is not something that's like new for you, but it is something that's new to the show. I think this is going to revolutionize the way that a lot of people look at punting, because I feel like, what do you think the biggest pitfall is in punting? Because in my mind, I feel like it's people deciding what punt they want to do based on like a player they like or a thing that worked for them in the past, as opposed to, it's almost like predetermining it as opposed to reacting to what the data says you should do.
Yeah, that's a good one. And I think it's also what we talked about earlier is focusing too much on what a player does in the punting category. That really should not matter.
So it's really more of like trying to avoid focusing on losing a category and focusing more on how to win.
Win the rest. That's it. It's just like pretend it doesn't exist. If you're in a 9 category league, you're punting assists. Pretend you're in an 8 category league without assists.
What do you do about turnovers? I know I'm taking a hard left turn here, because that's one that, man, I feel like if I got every analyst onto the show at the same time, everyone would just be yelling over each other about this one topic. And I don't know what the right answer is here.
Yeah. I mean, I know you're a bit of a turnovers truther, and I am too.
Hey,
I just think punting turnovers is so ingrained in the fantasy community that why not try to just be bad in them? Like if you're just bad instead of terrible, you might be like fourth best. You don't have to. Like you'll lose to the punt assist teams, but like you could beat everyone else, and I think that's a huge advantage, especially when the playoffs roll around. I hate punting turnovers in the playoffs. Like my number one, like I hate it with a passion because you're probably going to run into injuries during the playoffs, like almost every team does. And if you run into injuries and still aren't winning turnovers because you're punting them so hard, you're dead. Like you need to pick that up. So like at least when it comes to the playoff, I don't mind punting turnovers earlier in the season. But I rarely do like a super hard punt to them because I worry about not being able to pick them up in the playoffs in like a worst case scenario.
Talking to Adam G. Stock on Twitter, the Punt Master. One more silly question for you before you go. Have you ever done the reverse fun or maybe call it a punt fun team? So basically no points, no rebounds, like basically you're exclusively targeting steals, blocks, turnovers, and the 2 percentages. Have you ever done that just for fun?
I don't know that built exactly, but some of my punt points teams turned into that. Like 1 year, Trevor Ariza was my best player, and I won, which was like my favorite fantasy accomplishment ever. I think I took like Lowry. No, I think I took it was like Pikabaka, OKC with all the blocks. I think I took him and then Lowry. They both got hurt in early March, and so I went in the playoffs with like Ariza as my best player. But because I had like that build, like or something pretty close to that, like you can if you can lock in 5, like it works. Like you definitely not something you want to do early in the season because honestly, if you win 5-4 every week, but then lose twice 7-2, you might miss the playoffs. So don't do those crazy like quad punts. But when it gets to the playoffs, it can definitely work.
That, by the way, that story you're telling, I think was before the existence of this very weird draft board behind me, right?
Oh yeah. I'm talking like 2012,
Yeah.
before when fantasy was still, I don't want to say in the dark ages, but there weren't as many guys who knew what they're doing. And then like punt points, like if like your league mates had never seen it, like you can just destroy them.
Yeah, you would have run them every week because everyone out there is going for freaking RJ Barrett types, and you're just like,
exactly.
No, we're gonna go with the opposite of that, friends. Yeah, you can just smoke them. Adam, thank you so much for talking punting with me today. My goal is to, and I've said this before, to have basically everybody on the show once a month or so. Can I bug you in July?
Yeah, you can bug me whenever. Good excuse to pass the kid off for 25, 30 minutes.
That's true. I'm going to bug you all the time. You're like, oh yeah, I gotta do a really important podcast with some guy called the Old Man Squad. See how long that works in your personal life. Adam G. Stock on Twitter, Elite Fantasy Basketball. I know you got other stuff there, but I just love hammering the punting thing because I always felt like there was this massive hole there in the fantasy world where people were doing it so wrong, and you came in and you were like, actually, and I still don't think the at-large community has figured out what you're trying to teach them. So we'll do a little teaching on the show, and I get to do a little learning myself because I'm not a big punt guy, and so these are always really fun for me. So thank you, my good man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Dan. Thanks for having me on. Congrats on the new show.
Thank you. Yeah, well, I'll talk to you really soon.
Great.
Dude, I hope you guys are learning things from this. Adam Stock, Adam G. Stock. Follow him, learn from him. By the way, I think it was before this draft board. It's right before this draft board. Adam is also a former FSWA Writer of the Year. Big brains. That's what we're doing here. We're amassing big brains on the podcast, and we're going to all get better at fantasy sports because of it. Like, it just makes sense. Ah, man, I love it. I love it. So here's what we're going to do. This is going to be like an arc with Adam. And he is going to be back at some point in the not too distant future, because after we see free agency, you start to get a better idea of what's going on. Certainly by the time that initial Yahoo board comes out, because that's like the big drop in the fantasy world. That's, everybody's got their thing. The football, NFL guys are always waiting for the schedule to come out. We fantasy weirdos are waiting for the Yahoo first leagues to open. That's the moment. The hell with the ESPN stuff and whatever else. And when the Yahoo stuff opens, that's when we get nuts. And once you see that, we'll start to work backwards. I'm going to try my hand at it. Say, okay, like, here's what I see on the initial board. Here's some guards in the 50 to 80 range. That it's really, really funny to see the fan blowing the board behind me. It looks like someone's about to attack me on the other side. I got all these guards in the 50 to 80 range and that are bad, I don't know, at points or steals or something like that. Now, this probably isn't going to be the case. This is entirely a hypothetical. The only reason I bring it up is that what Adam was talking about is this key component of punt strategy and why you need to reassess it on a year-by-year basis. And things change. The landscape changes. Usually not like a quick flip from one direction to another overnight. You'll probably see more of a sort of a gradation towards it. But what he presented was, I thought, so pivotal, and why I wanted to spend a lot of our time actually today with Adam focusing on that very topic. Because when he looks at the board, what he's telling you, just to use an example, he talked about Daniel Gafford, who was getting drafted near 100 this year, by the way. And, forget the fact specifically of where he finished just on a straight rank basis, because that made Gafford really good whether or not you were punting something. Because if you got him at 100 and he finished at 36 per game during the regular season, that's a colossal value. If you were also punting 3-pointers, that changes things even more. So now suddenly, and you're like, Dan, he's a big man. What does it matter if he's punting 3-pointers? Well, as Adam just told you guys, a lot of big men now are hitting 1 to 2 3-pointers a game. And that's the difference between being a massive negative in that category, the largest negative you could possibly be, because Daniel didn't hit a single one all year, and being kind of like neutral, which is the idea of the punt. And it wasn't so much that you were out to get Gafford because he was awful at 3-pointers, but if you were building a punt 3 team and you had these, what I would call more traditional big men, Gafford, Adam also mentioned Mark Williams was in that range. Rudy Gobert was a little bit earlier with a worse free throw percent, but he's in there as well. You're now looking at these options for building a team without a category that has become much more popular in recent years. If you're looking earlier in the draft, DeAndre Ayton was someone that would have worked. He was a sort of a late, early middle guy, where Gafford was a very late middle. You might even call him like kind of an early, late guy. Jared Allen, another big man that didn't hit any 3-pointers. Jared Allen, DeAndre Ayton, Daniel Gafford. Who else didn't hit a single 3-pointer this year? I mean, we talked about Gobert a minute ago. But this is what makes that so intriguing. Let's see if I'm missing anybody. Nick Claxton is in there. Hardenstein throughout the middle of the year. Jalen Duren when he was upright. Duren was another one that went later. Pirtle that Adam mentioned. Clint Capella also in there. So there's this, and some of those guys are punt, free throw, and punt 3 kind of build dudes. But the reason, it's not so much that these guys were great for this build. The reason that they were great for this build is because only 1, 2, maybe 3 of the names that I just mentioned were guys you had to actually spend any legitimate draft capital on. You could get Ivica Zubac quite late. I think his rank before punting was like 120, and then with punt, suddenly he was like an early middle round guy. And Gafford was number 14 if you were punting 3-pointers. Forget free throw percent. These are guys, Gafford, Gobert was getting drafted in the 60s, 70s range, which again, not as late, but still in there. Mark Williams was 70s. Claxton was earlier, so probably maybe don't throw him in there. Duren was more 70 to 100 range. Pirtle was in that range. Capella was in that range. It was by design that when Adam saw the board and was like, oh, damn, there's like 6 traditional centers that I think are going to be values with or without a point, that a punt, right? With or without a punt, I should say, that also go flying up the board with one. Now, maybe it's something different next year. I don't think the expectation is that, but this is the kind of thing we're going to look at. What if we find next year that in that 50 to 100 range, there's a bunch of, say, I don't know, for example, guards that I don't want to don't hit threes, or guards that don't get steals. Because there's a decent chunk of those guys out there. Like, I think Alex Caruso was probably a guy that fell into that range as a guard who didn't get many steals. Then suddenly now you're like, okay, well, I can take my big men earlier because they're going to fill out around these other categories I need. But there's going to be a bunch of guards later that can take care of, threes or points or assists or whatever it is as the draft goes on. So you pick big men that lean into those early, which is, again, I don't think this is the way it's going to happen. I'm just saying this is what you can get by looking at the board. This is what Adam is trying to teach us, which is look at the board, see that you can get a lot of your traditional big man stats at value, but you're going to take a massive hit in threes and probably a decent size hit in free throw percent from those guys as well. So make sure you cover the other things. You're probably not going to be able to cover everything early if you're leaning into these big men that don't hit three-pointers. You're probably just not going to be able to cover threes. But they're not that great at scoring. Cover that early. They're not great at assists. Cover that early. They might be okay, actually, at steals. A lot of these guys were decent big men at that, but you'll want to cover that early as well. Field goal percent, you're in pretty good shape, but, probably don't want to get somebody that's a full punt on that, at least not a bunch of them. So team build. Now, this, of course, works better on head-to-head. These punt shows always lean head-to-head over roto. I know you guys see me as the roto guy, but there's a lot of strategy in basketball on both sides. Now, for roto, you really can't afford to blow a few categories at the same time. So if you're planning on going with those big men in the later rounds, you probably want to lean a little bit of a different way early and say, you know what, I can't get away with punting threes and free throw percent. So early on, I got to either A, make sure I cover my threes, or B, cover my free throw percent so that I can get these big men values later on. To that end, it's probably easier to build this way on the head-to-head side. But all of these things, additional things we could talk about with the punt master himself, Adam G. Stock, on Twitter the next time we talk, or the time after that, or the time after that. Thank you for listening. Thank you for listening all week long, everybody. I cannot express enough how much I appreciate the continued support as I do try to build out this brand new network, the Old Man Squad Sports Network. I mean, the simple fact that we've got like 12 shows, I think, on the network already, and we haven't even been in existence a month, is just more than I could have ever dreamed of in terms of people not only wanting to support it, but be a part of it. It's going to continue that way. There's, 4 or 5 more shows that are already either in the works, or on their way to transferring over. It's been awesome. It's been so awesome that I haven't been able to launch my other shows yet, but those are coming. Lakers show coming from yours truly, the Pragmatic Fan. That show is going to be called Title or Bust. It's not the way I actually feel. It's sarcasm, friends. You can follow along with that one. We'll also get a Dodgers show going in the not too distant future. I was kind of hoping that would be going already. But time has required other things, making sure that this show is rolling, making sure that we got the other dozen shows going here on the Old Man Squad Sports Network, and just continued growth. So thank you to everybody that's done it. As I mentioned earlier on, this show not live on Twitter, and I'm hoping that we can continue to gravitate away from Twitter for the shows, because it really doesn't do anything for a host. If you want to support a host you like, forget me, or don't forget me, but me and anybody else, support them on traditional pod channels. That's the most important way. That's the best, where hosts make the most money off of that from advertising. YouTube would be like a distant second place. And then social media is like, there's kind of no point. So we're going to try to move away from it as best we can. Please find the show however you're listening now. That's one of the ways you'll be able to get it going forward. Today's YouTube, like, subscribe, iTunes, Spotify, like, rate, subscribe, all that stuff. And obviously, I'm going to still do a ton of stuff on social media. So don't, we're not going to shut that bad boy down. Just from shows, we're going to make sure that those are available first and foremost in other places. Shout out to my good new friends, the Menace Podmen, who had me on their show yesterday. We mostly just talked about being grumpy and old for a while, but those guys were really awesome. Make sure to check out their pod as well. That is the Menace Podmen. We'll get them on this pod at some point here in the not too distant future. And if you guys want to do me one extra favor, go seek out Scott Bogman and Jonas Nader and let them know I really want to do a Big Three reunion show. I think if we all yell at them together, then they'll have no choice. Love you guys. Thank you again, everybody, for listening. Thank you to our 5 guests this week. It's been guest central, baby. Mike Catron on Monday. So if I can remember the order on this. Jacob Dunn was Tuesday. No, Keith Cork was Tuesday. Jacob was Wednesday. Noah was yesterday. Noah Rubin yesterday. Adam Stock today. You can find all of those guys. Mike at Watch the Boxes. Cork. Keith is Ethos Keith. Jacob is Ain't Done Yet on social media. Noah is Noah Rubin 22. And Adam G. Stock today, the Punt Master. Thank you to all those guys. We've had, I think now, like 13 guests in our last 14 shows. So Monday, no guest. Just me. Back to the old way. Shouting into the void. But we got some old man squad stuff to recap. See how a lot of that stuff did. Thank you again, everybody. Love y'all. See you on Monday.